Welcome to Boomer Being. Today's guests will be talking about making a difference in this life. The topic is philanthropy, with a twist. Boomer philanthropy from generation to generation. My guests today include three members of the same family. Andy Macomber, governor at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts. Grace Macomber Bird, board member, Lazarus House Ministries. And Meredith Grace Bird, student at Colorado College. They'll be joined by Deborah Rahman Silberstein, a well-known attorney with expertise in trusts, estates, and philanthropic giving. Deborah's PhD dissertation was a study of giving between generations. Charitable planning and counseling families is an integral part of her practice. A warm welcome to all of you. Thank you. What does philanthropy mean to each of you? And could you speak a little bit about what current charity or foundation you're most involved with at this time? Andy, let's start with you.
Philanthropy, to me, means that my life is much richer, because everybody has a story, and the world is full of interesting stories, and just makes me feel rounder and better. I'm interested, actually, I'm on 4 boards right now, in not one particular charity, and they're mostly to do with children, and especially children's mental health, but also people with talent, like the museum school. And I got started being interested in children, especially when I worked for the Metropolitan State Hospital, working without remuneration, as I have all my life, and gone from there.
Great. And philanthropy for me has been an opportunity to connect people, and my main charity has been Lazarus House Ministries. I've been active there for the last 12 years, and it started with Meredith got our family involved, and she can perhaps tell you about that. But for me, it's an opportunity to connect people to a cause and to have people find out what their own talents are that they could assist that organization with. And in terms of the intergenerational piece, my parents' legacy and model for me was to give generously of their time and of their abilities to help.
Okay.
I see philanthropy as a way to make things happen. One of my biggest fears is being stagnant, so philanthropy is really a way to remain an active citizen of my community and of the world. And it's also, on a basic level, it's just an adventure for me. It makes me happy. I learn a lot from it. And the most important project to me that I'm working on right now, or I'm involved in, is a club at my school, and it's called Colorado College Learning Initiative in the Mountains. And it's environmental and outdoor education with at-risk middle school youth in the area.
Wonderful. I'm sure that's a very worthy cause. So let's talk about motivations. You're all extremely active in the community and doing all kinds of charitable work. Where do you find your motivation to give, and how has giving changed over the years?
That's a good question. My motivation probably, I know, came from my parents. Giving has changed. I have to think about that. I grew up, I was a World War II baby. Women did more, but then, of course, as we all know, they got involved in housework, and their husbands kept buying them more utensils and more gadgets to get them more involved. And so I didn't really see volunteering as coming back until more recently. I see it now a lot, because a lot of jobs require you to do some work.
So the volunteering, the community service
yes,
organizations,
I see it coming back.
Yeah.
But with my kids, they started right out. My daughter, although she'd never really worked with such a disrupted community as Lawrence, has gotten really into all their problems. And my granddaughter did her first charitable walk or on her own, going to neighbors to get some money when she was
7.
7.
So she had raised the funds to do the Hike for Hope, and which was the initial walk was 13 years ago, and their goal was to raise over 10 years to raise enough money to build a 20-unit apartment building where people could stay longer than emergency shelter. So Meredith went out the door the day before, raised the funds through the neighborhood with a can. She was 7. She came back, and her brother said, "I'll be on your team, Meredith," and off the two of them went the next day. And from that, my motivation for being involved is seeing someone get enthusiastic. They were excited about the idea of helping the homeless, and then I saw the two of them excited about doing something together. And in the years that followed, Meredith brought in people from the neighborhood, and some of those kids would then form their own team. And in fact, they were able to raise the funds within 7 years, not 10. So the groundbreaking occurred, and at that groundbreaking, my husband was looking at a dilapidated building that was on the lot and just saying, boy, it'd be great if that could be gone and they could use this for open space for the families living here. And he was talking to my father, and my father went home that night, and my parents called and said, we'd like to make that real. We'll buy that building, let's take it down. And just that, seeing, that to me is the intergenerational part. You know, it started with this little one going around saying, oh, that looks interesting. And then my parents believing in what we believed in.
Wonderful.
And supporting that.
Absolutely wonderful.
I guess my motivation comes down to mainly curiosity. Just I hear about these causes and I want to learn more about them, and I figured the best way to learn more about them is to get involved. And definitely comes from having role models such as these two in my life, and just seeing how enriched their lives have become from their philanthropy work and how they've enriched the lives of others. And that's just a really beautiful thing that I want to be a part of.
I think we've talked about in terms of enriching others and tapping others. There's what you're doing for people who need help. And I'll use the hike again just because that's my example today. Friends of mine who have skills, perhaps they're an aerobic instructor, they've done the warm-up of the Hike for Hope before the hike starts. The Treble Chorus of New England sang God Bless America in the opening ceremonies for the first 9 years, and then started to collaborate with the Lawrence High School Girls Chorus. And just to see those connections, that gets me really excited. In addition to the fact that the house was being built, and the last 3 years, residents from the house have walked in the hike. So people who got excited about doing the hike for someone they never knew, they weren't homeless, now are walking with these people.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Debbie, maybe you can speak a bit about all your research and what the research says about motivations for charitable giving.
So I'd like to also add that there's a thread here of caring that you can see within these three incredible women, and you could see that there's this authenticity, and that actually was, in terms of, to answer your question, one of the findings about motivations. It was that the authenticity of caring that people saw and felt. And so Andy mentioned it in her stories and in giving back, and Grace mentioned it in the connection piece. And then you can see how excited Meredith is in terms of her motivation. But, you know, people oftentimes think external motivations are what motivate people for philanthropy, and those are, you know, taxes or prestige or social recognition. And in fact, it's those internal motivations that all of these women are expressing that are doesn't mean the other ones aren't important. They have some level of importance, but it's the caring, and it's the compassion, and it's the connection. And that is exactly what my study found in terms of those internal motivations that make people philanthropic.
I don't know if you remember what you said about when people come and ask you about making a donation. It seems to speak to what Debbie's saying.
It's true. You feel the passion in their request, and that makes all the difference if it has to. But I think also people give in different ways because everybody needs to express what their talents are. And if you're an artist, you really want to paint and draw. If you're a musician, you have to have an instrument. And if you're a good networker, getting people together, that's a talent, and it wants to be used. And I think that's what Gay has, and I think Meredith too. I think it's just getting together the right people to do the right job.
That's a great point that you make about everybody having their own passion,
Yeah.
you know.
The talents
right.
just ooze out of people, and they're quite different. Everybody's
Right.
different. I'd
Good
love
point.
to have you run an organization for me and a good panel.
You know, I was going to ask you, because I know you've worked on dozens of charities over the year, and when I read your bio, I was so moved and impressed by your commitment to giving. How do you evaluate a charity, and are there any favorites that you could recommend in case any viewers are saying, well, I'd like to get involved and I might like to, start giving?
Wow, that's a big question, because
Yes.
I think anybody who wants to get involved really should talk to a few people that are doing something that they might get interested in. Certainly, you want to be able to work without remuneration and not feel it's an inferior job, not to be paid. Just getting to know people and finding out, what they're doing, and then does that hit me? Is it something I'd like to get involved with?
And that speaks to the volunteer component too. That's one thing to do. And you also asked about who we might recommend to give to if donors were watching. And my experience in over the years has been, Lazarus House has been a fabulous place because you can have access to it. You can go serve a meal, you can do the walk, you can meet the people. There are other organizations that we've talked about and been involved with. One that I spoke with you about is the Judge Baker Children's Center in Boston. They do phenomenal research on mental, I like to call it wellness issues, particularly with children, and trying to make sure kids don't end up, it started with Judge Baker said these kids shouldn't be in the penal system. They need some skill sets, and the parents need skill sets. But the Baker doesn't have a volunteer opportunity. They need money. They need us to give so they can do their research. So that's another, I'm throwing that out as an organization that I think is important, and another way
No,
to
that's
do that.
I'm glad you brought that up, because it is a problem. You have to be involved, I think, and see it happen. And my interest in children's mental health really was working at the Metropolitan State Hospital when it still existed. It was just west of Belmont Hill, a big imposing structure with, and most of all that's left is the Fernald organization, which is for retarded children, severely retarded. But the rest are all now scattered around different treatments of different kinds. But when I worked there, I had a job there. I could be in the kitchen serving these kids. And there was one little boy, when I first came, who had his hood over his head. And people said, oh, there's Tommy. How are you, Tommy? And he wouldn't say much, and you spooned out the food for him, and he walked off. Then next time I came, Tommy, was sort of out of his hood. And then later on, he was just walking in, and everybody was greeting him again. And then all of a sudden, I came and hit the hood over himself again. And I could see how he needed that encouragement of people just serving food, and how it made me interested. Why did he regress? The psychiatrist said to me, well, we help these kids. Their kids have come from troubled neighborhoods, violence, abuse, bullying, tragedy, and we can help them. And then they go back home, and then often they come back again. And I thought, oh, that is really tough.
Yeah.
But what helped me is just what Gay said, was just seeing this boy in the hood. I've just seen kids like that all my life, with those hoods on them, coming off, hopefully.
Leslie, one of the things that's very interesting here is that Grace was expressing really what her generation is very reflective of, and that's hands-on involvement. And what's interesting is that your mom also, the traditionalist generation is typically more of less hands-on than the boomer generation, but yet your mom is expressing sort of that hands-on piece really was an important connection for her.
Yeah, that's interesting for me to hear this story, because I think of them as lending their very great talents to boards at an advisory level and being extremely generous financially, but I haven't known as much about the hands-on that I've done. And then you get to Meredith's generation, and it's almost necessary, I think.
And if I'm not mistaken, you two are leaving for Haiti to do some real hands-on. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So next Sunday, my mom and I are headed off to a permaculture communal living space in a town of Haiti, and we'll be going there to help with, it's a volunteer-based project that is aimed at providing food security for the city that we'll be in. So I don't know if you want to expand on it.
The name is Sad Enough Forest is the organization, and it's an interesting one because it is volunteer-based. So they ask you to come for an extended period of time so they can train you to be a valuable volunteer. You know, we're not. It's not a one-day kind of thing.
What exactly do you do when you're there?
Planting primarily, but it's a community that's living together. So I think what I actually will be doing is she'll probably be doing more planting, and I'll probably be doing things like sewing the mosquito nets and cooking. I love to cook. There's 60 people that need to be fed. I've never cooked for 60. That would be interesting. But the idea is to be learning certainly for Meredith, the interest was to be learning about creating sustainable food systems.
Wonderful.
So, yeah.
And I know at the end of the show we're going to have some addresses, web addresses, if you're interested in any of these organizations that the family has mentioned.
So I'm going to add in another piece about this whole generational differences. If you notice, Meredith's connection now is Haiti. Now she started the connection locally, but what I found with the younger generation is that their connections were much broader than the older generations. And I don't know how their connections will evolve. Who knows where Meredith will be, 15 years from now. But it is typical of your generation to look outside a little bit further
And I think
away.
it's been something that the industry, if you want to call it that, has capitalized on. Being able to go do work in another country, and being able to, and being an organization that can provide the way to do that in a fulfilling way and safely. And it's interesting for organizations back home saying, "Why, we got people who are hungry here. Why can't you work here?" And they're all valid. It's all value. And another thing that my mother and I spoke about was a stressor on some of the organizations that I've been involved with is the very good attention now being given to services for our troops and veterans. But I would say people that I have been involved with, the resources are getting drawn to taking care of our vets that come home. And,
I think that's really interesting, because I know we've been interested in the Judge Baker Children's Center, all of us, because we have heard in many sources that there's one in every 5 members of a family have had some experience with depression or anxiety, but depression is all around, and of course in the armed forces it must be extraordinary, and the damage that does to the family, to the work that the elders are going to, and then coming back to this depressed situation. Oh, it's just heartrending, and I don't quite know how you can work with with these veterans. I'd like to know more.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to know more.
There's a lot more attention being given to that, and fundraising hikes or walks or you had. What did St. Paul's kids do?
At my former high school, they just started this project there, and it's called Combat Paper. and they worked with veterans in the area to take their old uniforms and make art out of them. So it was an environmental recycling project, but also working with the veterans, and some of them had artistic talent. So again, back to the talent, just kind of using that.
And that's a wonderful example of your generation doing something I don't think my generation ever thought of doing something like that. You know, working with, I can't believe it. It's wonderful.
And one of the things, like you were very interested in Judge Baker, right? And Grace probably learned about that. And what I found is that the younger generation may be interested in some broader perspective of that. So their giving in the future may not be to that particular institution,
Right.
or a piece of it may be. And they may feel an obligation to you and your husband, and so they'll be giving there still, but not as passionate towards another area that will evolve from that interest in mental
Right.
health.
Right.
So we'll see where. All eyes will be on you.
I think that's true, because you've talked about the environment being what you want to focus on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's very ambitious, right? And that's another thing about your generation that I found as well, in that we sort of, maybe as parents or as boomers, which I am, you know, underestimate that generation, and the population at large we thought, you know, these kids are just, you know, whatever. And you're like, your generation is so ambitious about the problems in our world, and you want to solve them. And I can hear from your enthusiasm how much you want to do it. And I think it's very reflective of your age group.
So, you know, maybe I can ask you at this moment, when people come into your practice and they want to maximize their giving or their involvement, even though maybe they're a small giver financially, how do you counsel them?
You know, that's, in a way, it's sort of a conversation for another day.
Oh, okay.
Well, because it's a little bit away from sort of the generational piece, but basically what I would say is find what your real passion is, and everything makes a difference. And charities today are finding ways through use of the internet and small gifts. Look, the March of Dimes had a tremendous impact on all of us, right? And that started by everybody giving a dime. So, you know, no gift.
No gift is too small,
right.
Definitely small gifts really matter.
I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Participation really matters. Yeah. And one of the things that we've talked about too is fundraising, and I like to fundraise, sort of. But down at Sadhana Forest, you are able to give a talk in the evening if you wish to. And I know that it's a nonprofit organization, and I'm going to ask them, would you like me to talk about how to fundraise? And just, all you need to do is say, this is my passion, this is my project. And as long as you're not afraid of someone saying no, it's got to be okay for them to say no. You can ask anyone. And if they feel the connection, it'll grow. And I think you've figured that out, and I'd learned that from you.
Andy, you must be so proud.
Oh,
You must be so proud of.
I am. I really
Your
feel
children.
that I really felt it is my legacy that I will leave
Oh,
this world with feeling they're doing a good job.
they're doing a wonderful job.
Can I share the quote?
Oh, please.
This is a quote from Bridget Shaheen. I said I wasn't going to get weepy, whoops. But it speaks to how this moves all of us. And she just was saying thank you. And may the miracles that you've been part of and the magic of believing that you inspire bring you the joy and peace that you bring to others. That's the motivation.
That's so beautiful. Well, at this point, I'd love to hear a little more from Debbie about, you know, you've done your PhD and studied, you know, philanthropy, and it's part of your practice, and bringing this all together. What are your perspectives to share?
Well, you know, one thing that be interested, if there's time enough to hear from Meredith, is how her grandparents really influenced her. Because one of the interesting finding was that the boomers were very philanthropic and also very conscious of how they motivated or they worked with their family and their kids to do things. You know, they do walks together, to maybe take them to events together, you know, and then I'd ask the younger generation, well, what really motivated you? And oftentimes it would be something that the grandparent did, some story that the grandparent told them. And it could even be, you know, we could see that you two probably spend a lot of time together, but it was even in cases of children and grandchildren that didn't spend a lot of time together. The grandparents had a very big impact on grandchildren. The other thing that made a big difference was family foundations. And oftentimes they were set up initially just for tax reasons, and later on, years later, the family maybe started to use them to enhance bonds within families. But for the younger generations, for the boomers, for the millennials, and the Gen Xers, it became a bond for the family, and it also became a focus for them to focus on their giving. So, and the last piece I'd add is that authenticity, never lose sight of that. That is the real motivation, and it's, as you said earlier, it's different for everybody, but that's what really counts.
Right. Do I have time to
Yes,
answer?
we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Okay. I guess for me, it's hard to distinguish who in my family specifically influenced me, but I think both of these two lovely ladies did a great job of just making it a fun activity that we did together and making it something fun. It was never a chore. And I think speaking to the influence of my grandparents versus my parents, it is hard to distinguish if one had more of a difference than the other, but they've both served as role models.
It's because you were 4 grandparents, and you saw a lot of what Carolyn Burr did with the Hearing Dog Foundation.
Right.
And that must have made an impression.
Yeah, that's very true. I've definitely been inspired by my grandparents and seen what
Family
they've done.
affair.
Tell what Karen did about the hearing dogs. It was interesting.
Okay, my grandmother on my other side, she has started a hearing dog foundation in Stowe, Massachusetts, and she had no experience with anything having to do with it, and just started this great foundation that lasted for a very long time.
And teaching dogs to hear,
To help for the deaf.
a blind person or a deaf person couldn't hear the elevator, and the dog would learn to hear the elevator and learn to tell if the phone was ringing, or a baby was crying. It's fascinating.
It really is.
She crafted this service out of, it was a farm the family that took old horses to die or to live happily, and that was dissolved, and so then there was this place to step in, and she did it.
This has been so wonderful, and I thank you all so much for giving your time. Please watch and look at the end of this show. You'll see multiple foundations that you can write into or send a check. And thank you for being with us on Boomer Being. See you next time.